I know I've been traveling a lot over the past few months, and I haven't had a chance to review any new Mac with an M4 chip, but thankfully, while visiting my family, I am finally able to check out in the flesh my dad's latest Mac, the M4 MacBook Air, which may just be possibly the best deal in Apple Mac history. Let's begin. So while this MacBook Air is brand new, he didn't actually buy it from Apple because once again, for some reason, I guess to just maintain market share, Amazon is selling these things for cheaper than Apple, even though, again, brand new, not a refurbished MacBook, not renewed or anything like that. It's not used. I checked system information. This is a brand new, fresh battery, no cycles, for just $900, okay? And especially with factoring in inflation these days and how much weaker the US dollar is getting, this is actually quite a bargain, I'd say, for the money. I really haven't reviewed or touched the MacBook Air since the M2 variant, which was a while ago. It's been a minute, and it was kind of a hard recommendation back then because the price had gone up, and in my opinion, it was just very difficult to justify when the M1 MacBook Air was still available for much cheaper. But it took Apple a few iterations, but after just a couple of years of refinement, now I feel like the M4 MacBook Air, especially at the $900 price point, has reached a level where, okay, this is a pretty hard deal to beat. For one, they've now finally got the center stage camera on this thing as well, which is fantastic even if you don't plan on using center stage, because it just means that you get, the full 1080p webcam, and it's a lot more zoomed out than a traditional webcam is. So that makes it look a lot more, presentable, and especially because this is a 13-inch notebook that's pretty lightweight, you're oftentimes using it pretty close to the webcam. So when you have a really wide field of view, this allows it to feel a bit less claustrophobic when you're in meetings or recording videos. And they improve the microphones on these things as well. And of course, yes, the M4 chip is blazing fast. I did some light video editing on this thing. Didn't skip a beat with 4K at 60 video being overlaid on top of itself with Final Cut, playing back at the original resolution, not on proxies or anything like that. But out of curiosity, I did, of course, do my traditional Tailosive Tech export speed test because this is what I use my MacBooks for more than anything. And yeah, we discovered that it's roughly half the export time of my M1 Max. So in case anyone was wondering if the base model M4 chip is outperforming the 4-year-old M1 higher end chips, well, when it comes to export times, not quite. I'm sure in single core performance, it's gotten much better. But honestly, while the M4 chip has more hardware accelerated ray tracing available, I feel like my dad and in general the specific demographic buying the cheapest MacBook possible is probably not going to notice or care that much about ray tracing. But obviously it's very surreal to be able to edit videos at this high of frame rate and resolution and have absolutely no active cooling system. So this thing always runs silently. It can get hot, but I think it's certainly not as bad as those original M2 MacBook Airs were. There was a noticeable decrease in the heatsink design when they switched away from the classic wedge design we saw in the M1 MacBook Air that actually created more thermal limitations with this design. But I think that was probably because the M2 chip wasn't that big of an upgrade over the M1. They were just kind of pouring more and more watts into it to justify the higher performance promises. And now I feel like in today's age, we've reached a point where the M4 chip doesn't get as hot as the M2, but still achieves really, really great performance, which is great because it was much more noticeable on the M2 MacBook Air how hot the laptop could get when doing fairly basic things, and then it would fail to save recordings I was doing, and it would corrupt the files, the computer would overheat. It just was not a good situation that I think has been vastly improved on this model. And sure, in the past it's probably been easy for me to say, well, never buy any new Apple product, just wait for last year's model to get cheaper or buy it secondhand or buy it refurbished. But there is a situation that made this one a lot more compelling of an offer, besides the fact that, yeah, unlike iPhones or maybe even Apple Watches, most people buy Macs and hold on to them for a long, long time. And Apple really started future-proofing their Apple Silicon Macs thanks to this whole overhyped, overmarketed Apple Intelligence train we're on right now. But even though I don't care too much about Apple Intelligence features, and I can guarantee you my dad isn't going to use any of them, it has made Apple more conscious about shipping their Macs with more unified unified memory. And that's what I think made this such a compelling deal that you probably aren't going to find. Yes, I'm sure you can find probably $500 M1 MacBook Airs out there, which will probably be fine. But if you're looking for that future proofing when it comes to the more unified memory, this was a $900 MacBook Air with the best silicon in its class yet. Still has great 18-hour battery life, still has 2 Thunderbolt ports that my dad is definitely planning on utilizing by using external monitors. He's more of a desktop guy, but again, he enjoys the flexibility of having a mobile workstation he can take with him. And all of that, and it still ships with 16 gigs of memory by default. That certainly provides a lot of future-proofing alongside, yes, the incredibly fast M4 chip, and that means that when he's plugging in external monitors and running many applications at the same time, he doesn't have to worry as much about running out of system memory. And yeah, I gotta admit, for $900, it's a really good deal considering it's a fresh, brand new battery. Don't have to worry about degradation or anything like that. And I don't have too many complaints to report on here. I know it took Apple a few generations, but I really think it's starting to make more sense with the latest variants of MacBook Air. This is cheaper than an 11-inch iPad Pro, which doesn't even come with a keyboard case and trackpad and all that. This includes the display. This includes speakers. This includes the keyboard and trackpad, and you're getting an M4 chip with fully unlocked macOS. No roundabout trying to recreate a Mac-like experience with iPadOS. And pretty much the only thing I would potentially give as a slight criticism to this thing is the integrated speakers are still not great. I don't think they've touched them since the M2 MacBook Air I reviewed a few years ago. That's one reason, if you are the kind of person to use dedicated speakers on these laptops pretty regularly, to consider going with a refurbished or secondhand M1 MacBook Pro. Even the ones on my 4-year-old Mac still sound amazing. The low frequencies they can stuff into such a small laptop is fantastic. Whereas these MacBook Airs, even the big one, the 15-inch variant, it really just kind of feels like iPad speakers. They can't hit that wide of a range of frequencies, and it's honestly just like a couple notches better than the speakers on your phone, but a lot of people are using AirPods or headphones these days anyway, or have designated speakers at their desk, in which case you can, save a lot of money by going with an Air and have a decent amount of money left over for an external monitor or a dedicated pair of speakers, which makes this a really, really hard deal to pass up on. So I'm glad my dad went with it, and while this thing is still not running circles around my 4-year-old MacBook Pro, it costs about 1/7 of what I paid for my MacBook Pro, but that was mostly because of storage options, which most of you guys probably wouldn't need. But I'm impressed. I think they did a great job with this thing, and all I want them to do next, I don't really think this Mac needs an M5 chip. Honestly, the M4 is probably overkill for its uses, but I really want Apple to revitalize that 12-inch MacBook enclosure and get back to making the thinnest and lightest MacBooks possible again. It's crazy to me that we're now like 5 years into this Apple Silicon era of the Mac lineup, and they still haven't made the thinnest and lightest Mac yet. That record is still held by the 12-inch MacBook from 2015, which my mother still uses, and she still loves that thing. It's certainly not as fast as the M4, and it doesn't have as great a battery life, but if your goal was just to make the thinnest, most lightest possible MacBook, that 12-inch one, it still blows my mind every time I use it. And I don't think it sold that well just because it was too ahead of its time. It needed Apple Silicon, and that wasn't available yet for the Mac. So if they just could go back to making the Air super thin and super lightweight, but just keep some of this performance, that would be fantastic, and I hope Apple does that next. But how do you guys feel about the M4 MacBook Air as a whole? Feel free to let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. So thanks again. This is your Apple Shape here, and I will see you all in the next one.